She was no longer part of his life, but her name still lingered in his phone. When Alexei scrolled through his contacts that evening, he wasn't looking for her. He was looking for something to delete, something to free up space, both digital and emotional. Yet there it was, Maria? The letters glowed faintly on the dim screen, as if waiting. His thumb hovered over the delete option, but instead, he tapped the chat. It opened instantly, flooding his eyes with years of frozen time. Smiling emojis, late-night jokes, arguments that ended with "let's not fight," photos from trips that already felt like a dream. For years, these messages had been ghosts, softly haunting, whispering what-ifs. But tonight felt different. Tonight, instead of the old ache, there was calm. Maybe it was age, maybe distance. Or maybe grief had finally burned itself out. He read one of her messages aloud, her words echoing softly through his small apartment. "You'll forget me one day. Promise me you will." He smiled for the first time in years, an honest smile, not forced or bitter. "I didn't," he murmured to the empty room, "but I survived." He took a sip of whiskey and scrolled to the very top. There, between old laughter and digital dust, he noticed something strange, an unfinished message in the drafts. "I'm sorry for how I left things," it read. "You deserved better." He remembered typing it one sleepless night years ago, his thumb trembling above send, then backspacing half the words, unable to let them go. The message had waited ever since, silent, patient, almost alive. He stared at it now, that single unsent apology, suspended in time like a heartbeat never finished. "What's one message after all these years?" he whispered. Maybe it was the whiskey, maybe the music humming faintly from the neighbor's wall, or maybe he was just tired of holding back. He pressed send. The moment his finger left the screen, a shiver ran down his spine. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was the feeling of crossing some invisible threshold. He stared at the screen, watching the message slip through the invisible wires of the world. "Message sent," the phone said, indifferent. He exhaled and set it down. Then, an unexpected vibration. His breath caught. On the screen, 3 small words appeared. Message read. His body went still. For a long minute, he just sat there, listening to the hum of his refrigerator, the distant sound of rain against the glass. The world felt suddenly sharper, thinner, fragile. Could it be a glitch? An accidental sync from the cloud? Or was she there, on the other end, right now, seeing his name light up after all these years? The thought hit him like a slow, quiet storm. Memories spilled out before he could stop them. The smell of her coffee, her hair tangled in the wind, the way she'd say stop overthinking whenever he got lost in himself. That voice, her quiet defiance, her laughter. For a moment, the years collapsed, folding like paper. He picked up the phone again, half expecting more. But the screen stayed silent, glowing faintly with her name. He waited, 5 minutes, 10. Nothing. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe she'd changed numbers, and some stranger had just opened it by accident. He laughed quietly to himself, though the sound carried no humor. "You idiot," he muttered. But the truth was, his heart hadn't pounded like that in years. He stood up, paced the room. The air smelled of rain and static. Through the window, the city blinked, indifferent, eternal. He thought of deleting the chat again, like he should have long ago, but couldn't bring himself to do it. There was something sacred about those messages, those fragments of a time when everything felt possible. He scrolled, slowly this time, letting each word fall like an echo. "Good morning, sleepyhead. Drive safe. Don't be stubborn. Miss you." Each phrase was a relic, a fossilized breath of another version of himself. He found her last message, the one she'd written before vanishing from his life, without warning. Just 3 words. "Take care always." He'd hated that phrase for years. It felt like a goodbye disguised as kindness. But now, reading it again, it didn't hurt. It felt like peace. The rain thickened outside. Alexei walked to the kitchen, poured another drink, and stood in the half-light, the phone still in his hand. It buzzed again. He froze. A new notification blinked on the screen. "Maria, hi Alexei. Didn't think you'd still remember." The glass almost slipped from his fingers. He sat down slowly, pulse drumming in his ears. It wasn't a glitch. It was her. The words were so simple, almost casual, but beneath them pulsed a decade of silence breaking apart. He typed, then erased, then typed again. "I didn't plan to send that." It was an old draft. He paused, then sent it. The dots appeared. 3 dots, blinking, then vanishing, then blinking again. He waited, each flicker a small explosion in his chest. Finally, her message appeared. Maybe it wasn't an accident. He leaned back, exhaling. The rain kept falling, whispering against the window pane like an old melody. He didn't know what this meant, if it was closure or the start of something he'd already buried. But for the first time in years, the silence between messages didn't feel empty. It felt alive. The next morning began as quietly as the night had ended. The message from her was still on his screen when he woke up, glowing like an ember that refused to die out. He lay in bed, phone in hand, rereading the line. Maybe it wasn't an accident. It played in his mind like a refrain, both gentle and dangerous. He tried to reply but couldn't find the right words. Everything he typed felt clumsy, too heavy, or too light. Eventually, he locked the screen, got up, and made coffee. The smell filled his apartment, but it didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a waiting room between 2 lives. The day passed in fragments. He worked, answered calls, nodded through meetings, but his thoughts kept drifting back to that one conversation that had somehow resurrected itself from digital dust. By evening, the pull was too strong. He opened the chat again. There was a new message. I saw your name pop up and thought I was dreaming. His heart stuttered. He typed, I thought you changed your number. A minute later, I did. For a while. But I switched back last month. Funny timing. Funny timing. The words rolled around in his head. After 10 years, they were speaking again because of a mistake or fate. He wasn't sure which frightened him more. Over the next few days, the messages multiplied. Short at first, polite, cautious, circling around safe topics like old friends who knew too much to ask the wrong thing. Do you still write? She asked once. Sometimes, he answered. Not like before. You should. Her encouragement stirred something dormant inside him, something he thought he'd buried along with their memories. He began to remember the things they used to dream about, the book he'd promised to publish, the trips they never took, the life that might have been. Each message felt like a ripple in time, pulling him back toward the version of himself he'd abandoned. But not everything came easily. One night, she sent a message that made him stop breathing. I didn't leave because of you. He stared at it for a long time, the words blurring in front of him. He typed, deleted, retyped, then finally asked, then why? No answer came. Not that night, nor the next day. The silence stretched, heavy and familiar. He told himself he didn't care, that the conversation had run its course. But the lie fell apart each time his phone lit up, and it wasn't her. He found himself rereading their old thread again. The early years, the laughter, the endless discussions about films, books, and the small, silly details that once made up a shared universe. He realized with quiet horror that he could still predict how she'd reply to certain jokes. It was as if part of her had never left his mind. His friends noticed his distraction. One of them, Dennis, called one evening. You sound off lately. What's going on? Alexei hesitated. Just someone from the past. You mean her? The question hit like a slap. Don't do this to yourself again, Dennis said. Some stories aren't meant for sequels. Alexei wanted to agree, but something deep inside whispered otherwise. The next night, Maria finally replied. I wasn't ready to tell you before. Maybe I still aren't. Just know it wasn't because of you. The message sat there, incomplete, yet full of weight. He wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but something told him not to push. Instead, he wrote, I never stopped wondering. Not because I wanted you back, but because I needed to understand. After a pause came her answer. Understanding doesn't always bring peace. They fell silent again, but it was a different silence this time. Thick, electric, filled with things neither dared to say. That night he dreamed of her, not as she had been then, but as she might be now. Older, quieter, her eyes holding stories he hadn't earned the right to know. When he woke, he found a new message waiting. Do you ever think about that morning at the lake? He remembered instantly, their last day together, the argument, her crying, the way the sun hit the water like shattered glass. He typed, every time it rains. She didn't reply, but he could almost feel her on the other side of the silence. The next few days blurred together. He became obsessed with fragments, half-sentences, old photos, things unsaid. His work suffered, his friends gave up trying to reach him, and still he checked his phone like a ritual. Then, One night, another message appeared. I found something you should see. It came with a photo, an old notebook, pages yellowed and torn. The cover read simply, "Letters I never sent." He stared at it, heart pounding. His fingers shook as he typed. "Is that yours?" "Ours," she replied. "You'll understand soon." His thoughts spiraled. The notebook, the messages, her sudden return. Everything felt like threads of a mystery he hadn't realized he was part of. He couldn't sleep. He walked through his apartment, restless, until dawn bled through the curtains. He finally sat down and wrote her a message he didn't plan to send. Maybe we were never finished. Maybe time just paused us. He didn't hit send. But deep down he knew it was true. And that truth, however small, was the most dangerous thing of all. The notebook appeared in his mailbox 3 days later, wrapped in plain brown paper with no return address. Only his name, written in her handwriting, slanted, careful, unmistakable. For a moment he just stared at it, fingers trembling, his heart pounding as if it might tear through his ribs. He hadn't seen her handwriting in years. Even the way she looped the A brought back memories. The postcards she used to leave on his desk, the notes she'd slip into his jacket pocket before a long day. He carried the parcel inside and set it on the table, staring at it for a long time as if opening it might somehow alter reality itself. Finally, he tore through the paper. Inside lay a weathered notebook, the same one from the photo. Its spine was cracked, its corners curled, as if it had lived many lives. The first page was blank except for a date, 10 years ago, and beneath it, a single line. "If I can't tell him, I'll tell these pages instead." He turned the page, and the flood began. Each entry was a letter, written to him. Some were long, some only a few sentences. Some angry, some tender. He read in silence, his coffee growing cold beside him, as her voice poured from the pages like a ghost made of ink. "You once said silence can heal, but I think silence only hides the wound. I wish I could tell you why I left, but you try to fix it, and not everything can be fixed." He read on, his heart tightening with every paragraph. Her words weren't bitter. They were heavy with sorrow, honesty, and love that had nowhere to go. She wrote about her fear of losing herself in the shadow of his dreams, her illness, the fatigue she'd tried to hide. The word diagnosis appeared halfway through one entry, and his breath caught. She hadn't told him. She'd carried it alone. "I didn't want him to see me fading," she wrote. "I wanted him to remember me laughing, not coughing." He shut the notebook, pressing his palms against the cover, his mind spinning. The air in his apartment felt thinner, harder to breathe. She had been ill, then, and he had never known. All those nights he'd cursed her for walking away. All those sleepless hours wondering what he'd done wrong, and she had been fighting something far crueler than him. He stood, paced, then sat again. The need to reach her overwhelmed him, but something in him hesitated. He didn't want pity to be the reason they spoke again. He wanted truth. He picked up the notebook once more and kept reading. "If he ever finds this, I hope he forgives me. I hope he knows I didn't run from love. I ran from fear." Her words carved through him. For a long time, he just sat there, the city's evening noise humming faintly beyond the window, the fading light turning the room gold. Somewhere between guilt and longing, something inside him shifted. He wasn't angry anymore, just aware. The messages they'd shared the past few weeks took on a new meaning now. Every pause, every hesitation, every carefully chosen word, it was all there, between the lines. She had wanted him to know, but not directly. Maybe she still couldn't bring herself to say it. Maybe that was why she'd sent the notebook. That night, he wrote to her again. "I read it." He waited, his thumb hovering over the phone as if ready to take the words back. But he didn't. He sent it. The reply came an hour later. "Then you know. Why didn't you tell me?" he wrote. A long pause. "Because I didn't want to be remembered as someone who needed saving." He stared at the screen, the words like a knife and a bomb at once. He typed back. "You weren't someone who needed saving. You were the reason I learned how to live." She didn't reply, not for hours. Then finally, "You always said that. You always saw a light in the places I didn't." He smiled sadly. "Still do," he whispered to the empty room. The next few days blurred into quiet exchanges, careful, fragile words between two people who had already said everything and yet nothing at all. They didn't talk about illness or the years apart. Instead, they spoke about the small things, the rain, books, songs they used to love. Yet underneath every message, there pulsed a question neither dared to ask. What now? On the fourth evening, she wrote something that made his pulse quicken. There's more. I left something for you in the old cafe. He froze. That cafe. Their place. The one by the river where they used to sit for hours, watching the city breathe. It's still open? He asked. Yes, she replied. The owner still remembers us. Ask for the window seat. You'll find it there. He didn't think. He just went. The night was cool, the air scented with rain. The cafe was smaller than he remembered, but it still smelled of roasted coffee and cinnamon. The owner, an older man with kind eyes, recognized him instantly. It's been a long time, he said softly. She told me you might come. He handed Alexei a small box wrapped in faded blue paper. Inside was a key. What's this? Alexei asked. The man smiled gently. She said you'd understand. He didn't. Not yet, but something in his chest ached with anticipation. He thanked the man and left, clutching the box like it contained the last thread of something sacred. That night, he found the courage to ask her. The key. What is it for? She replied quickly this time. For what's left of us. His fingers trembled as he typed back. Where do I use it? No answer came. Hours passed. Then finally, just one message. You'll know. He placed the key on his desk and stared at it for a long time, the metal glinting softly in the lamplight. It was small, ordinary, but it felt impossibly heavy, as if it held the weight of everything they had never said. He thought of calling her, hearing her voice again, but something stopped him. Maybe he was afraid. Maybe he wasn't ready for what came next. As he sat there, the notebook opened beside him and the key in his hand. One realization settled deep within him. She hadn't reached out just to remember. She wanted to be found. But before he could act, before he could even think, his phone buzzed again. A new message. Only 2 words, don't wait. And just like that, she was gone from the chat. Profile photo, removed. Status, blank. He called, but the number was disconnected. The line between worlds, once opened, had closed again. He sat there in silence, the rain tapping softly against the glass, the key cold in his palm, the notebook open to the last page. The final entry read, If he ever finds this, I hope he keeps living. I hope he doesn't waste his life waiting for what's already gone. The days that followed blurred into a strange half-life, as if reality itself had dimmed. The notebook lay on his desk like a wound that refused to close, the key beside it, mute, gleaming, patient. He tried to distract himself with work, errands, noise, anything that could drown out the echo of her last words. Don't wait. But the phrase kept returning in the quiet moments, whispered between the tick of the clock and the sigh of the rain. Every instinct told him to let go, yet his hands kept reaching for the phone, opening their chat only to find the same empty gray silhouette where her picture had been. Disconnected. Gone. He'd lost her once before, but this time it felt final. Not the hot, angry loss of youth, but the cold, slow kind that creeps through the bones and settles there. He spent one night drinking too much and reading the notebook again, page by page, looking for some hidden meaning he might have missed, a clue buried between her words. That was when he noticed the handwriting shift, near the end, smaller, more hurried. The ink blurred in places, as though written through pain. A date caught his eye, just a few months ago. It wasn't an old notebook after all. She had been writing still. If I'm not here when he finds this, tell him the key is to the house by the lake. The one that was supposed to be ours. His breath caught. The lake. Their lake. The place of their last argument, their last goodbye. He felt his pulse thunder in his ears as memories flashed. Her standing by the water, the sun behind her, her words sharp, but eyes wet. You don't understand, she'd said that morning. I can't stay and make you watch me disappear. He'd thought it was about their relationship, about her fear of commitment. He hadn't realized she'd meant it literally. Now, years later, he finally did. At dawn, without planning or packing, he drove. The highway stretched endless ahead, gray and washed with light rain. The wipers beat a rhythm that matched his heart. He didn't know what he was hoping to find. Closure, forgiveness, a ghost. But he had to go. The road led him out of the city, through forests he half remembered, until finally the lake appeared, vast and silver beneath a pale sky. The air smelled of pine and water, the kind of silence that makes the world feel paused. There, On the far side stood a small wooden cabin, the boards weathered, the roof sagging under years of wind. He parked the car, stepped out, and for a long while just stood there, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on him. Then he took out the key. The lock resisted for a moment, then clicked open with a quiet finality that made his throat tighten. Inside, the air was thick with dust and memory. The cabin was almost empty, just a table, 2 chairs, and a shelf lined with books. On the table sat a single envelope, his name on it. He didn't move for nearly a minute, afraid that touching it might make it vanish. When he finally opened it, his hands trembled. Inside were only a few lines, written in the same careful hand. If you found this, it means I'm not there. But that doesn't mean I'm gone. Some of us live longer in memories than in years. Don't waste the time I couldn't have. Don't turn your life into mourning. He sank into the chair, the letter trembling in his grip. Outside, wind moved through the trees, whispering like voices half-remembered. He read the lines again and again until they blurred, until the ink seemed to run into the paper like tears. He realized then that he had been chasing not her, but the version of himself who had loved without fear, who had believed that time could wait. She was never coming back, not in messages, not in letters, but she had left him something more dangerous, a reason to live differently. He sat there until dusk, watching the reflection of clouds ripple across the lake. When the first stars appeared, he noticed something else, a small box beneath the shelf, half hidden under dust. Inside were dozens of printed photographs, the kind they'd taken years ago on an old camera. Them laughing, her sitting by the water, his arm around her, and one of her alone, looking at the horizon, smiling faintly. On the back of that one she had written, "You'll find me in every place you dared to love." He pressed the photo to his chest, his breath catching between grief and gratitude. He thought of calling Dennis, of telling someone, but there were no words for this. It wasn't a tragedy, it was an ending, and endings were supposed to hurt. When he finally stepped outside, night had fallen. The air was cold, the lake black and still. He looked at the cabin one last time before locking it again, sliding the key into his pocket. He didn't know why, but he couldn't leave it there. Maybe some part of him still needed it. Maybe it was all he had left. As he walked toward the car, the phone in his pocket buzzed once. He froze. It couldn't be. He pulled it out. One new message, from her name. His heart nearly stopped. He opened it with shaking hands. The message contained no text, only an image, the photo of the two of them by the lake, taken years ago. At the bottom, a timestamp, 10 years old. Somehow, it had just arrived. A glitch, perhaps, or the universe's cruel joke. But as he stared at it, something in him broke open, not in pain, but release. He understood now what she had meant by "don't wait." She hadn't meant forget. She'd meant live. The rain began to fall again, soft and endless. He stood there in it until the message faded from the screen, washed by water and time. When he finally got into the car, he didn't drive away right away. He sat with the key in his palm, the photo in his lap, and whispered into the dark, "I'll live, Maria. I promise." And for the first time in years, he meant it. He returned to the city with silence trailing him like a shadow. The world outside seemed unchanged. Traffic, faces, meaningless chatter. But he wasn't the same man who had left. The letter, the notebook, the key, each felt like a map of something vast and unfinished, leading him not back to her, but toward the truth of himself. For days he spoke to no one, just walked through streets drenched in autumn light, listening to the hum of life. Yet beneath it all pulsed a quiet resolve. Something had to be said, done, written. He owed it to her, and to the years that had held their silence. One night, after hours of pacing, he sat at his desk and opened a blank document. The cursor blinked like a heartbeat. His fingers hovered, uncertain, then began to move. He didn't write a confession or a eulogy. He wrote her story, theirs, but not as tragedy. He wrote about love that bends without breaking, about time as a bridge instead of a wall, about messages that crossed the boundary between what was and what still might be. The words came in waves, raw and unstoppable. Each sentence peeled back another layer of guilt, another lie he'd told himself about closure. The night deepened around him, the city fading into quiet. By dawn, the manuscript was done, 6,000 words exactly. He stared at the final line. Love does not end. It only changes the language it speaks. For a long moment, he felt nothing but stillness. Then his phone buzzed. It was an email notification from an old, archived address. Her address. His chest tightened. The subject line read, "In case I don't get to say goodbye." His pulse stuttered as he opened it. The message was dated over a year ago. "Alexei, if you're reading this, it means I didn't find the courage to send it while I still could. I don't know how much time I'll have when this reaches you, but I need you to know, thank you. For loving me when I was still learning how to exist. For the laughter, for the quiet mornings, for believing I could write when I didn't. Don't chase ghosts. Don't keep waiting at the door. Everything I couldn't say is already written in those messages you never deleted. Maybe that's why I left them. They were pieces of both of us, preserved. I hope one day you'll forgive the silence. And if you ever find peace, keep it. Don't give it back to me." He read it twice, 3 times, until the words blurred. It wasn't just a letter. It was a final act of love, a way of freeing him. He wanted to scream, to cry, to beg for one more chance to reply. Instead, he just whispered, "You already said goodbye." Then something inside him shifted. He realized that for years, he'd been living as a half-man, haunted, suspended between regret and memory. But now, reading her words, he felt something close to forgiveness, hers and his own. That afternoon, he printed the story he'd written and took it to the publisher who had once rejected his early drafts. The man read a few pages in silence, then looked up. "This is different," he said. "It's alive." Alexei only nodded. "It's not fiction," he murmured. "It's a message." The publisher smiled faintly. "Then it'll find the ones who need it." Weeks passed. The manuscript became a book. Small at first, quiet. But readers began to find it. And in the letters they sent him, Alexei saw fragments of his own heart echoed back. People writing about lost loves, about messages left unsent, about forgiveness that arrived too late, but still mattered. And though he'd never admit it aloud, he knew Maria would have smiled at that. On the evening before the book's release, he returned to the lake. The air was cold, the water perfectly still. He stood by the shore, the last copy of the notebook in his hand. Slowly, he opened it to the final page and traced her handwriting one last time. Then he tore the page free, the one that read, "Don't wait," and set it adrift on the surface of the lake. It floated for a moment, then sank softly, disappearing beneath the ripples. "I'm not waiting," he whispered. "I'm living." The wind carried his words into the dark, and for a second, he could almost hear her laugh again. The sound light, free and untethered. When he returned to his car, another message waited on his phone. Unknown number. The screen glowed faintly in the darkness. He hesitated, then opened it. The message read, "Your book found me." Beautiful ending. No signature. No photo. Just that. His heart clenched, the world narrowing to a single breath. He typed a reply. "Who is this?" The dots appeared, then vanished. Appeared again. Finally, someone who remembers her. Then silence. He sat there for a long time, phone in hand, unsure if what had just happened was real or something born from longing. But it didn't matter. The message, whoever it was from, was the final bridge he needed. He looked out at the water, the reflection of the moon shimmering across it like silver ink. For the first time since she'd left, he didn't feel haunted. He felt connected, not to the past, but to everything that still lay ahead. He drove home with the window open, the night wind cold on his face. And for the first time in years, he didn't look back. When he reached his apartment, he placed the key on his desk beside the notebook and whispered, "Thank you, Maria." Then, almost without thinking, he opened their old chat. The messages were still there. Years of laughter, pain, tenderness. He scrolled to the very end, to his last line, "I'll live, Maria. I promise." He hit record and sent one final voice message. His voice was steady now. "I kept my promise." He pressed send. The app showed no recipient, no status, just an empty gray checkmark. But as he stared at it, a strange calm spread through him. Maybe she'd never hear it. Maybe she already had. Outside, the first snow of the year began to fall, soft and endless, blanketing the city in quiet. He turned off the lights, letting the glow of the phone fade to black, and sat there in the dark, listening to the silence, to his own heartbeat, to the life he still had left to live. Winter came quietly, without warning, the city folding into itself under sheets of snow. Alexei woke early each morning, made coffee, watched the steam rise and fade like a breath vanishing into time. His days had taken on a strange rhythm, no longer haunted, no longer waiting. The book was out in the world now, its title whispering through the small corners of the internet, passed between people who knew what it meant to lose and still keep loving. Sometimes he would get messages from readers, strangers who wrote as if they'd known him forever, confessing that his words had reached them at just the right moment. "Your story saved me," one wrote. "I finally deleted his number," another said. He never replied, but he read every word. Each message felt like a tiny resurrection, proof that what had once broken him now carried light into other people's darkness. The world outside was no longer gray to him. It pulsed with subdued color, like an old photograph coming back to life. He began to walk more, leaving his phone behind, feeling the crunch of snow beneath his boots, hearing the faint murmur of life return to the frozen city. The streets, once filled with memories of her, now seemed to hum with something softer, acceptance. One evening, as snow fell outside his window, his phone buzzed again. A new message, no name, no photo, just a single sentence. "She would have been proud of you." He stared at it for a long time, the glow of the screen reflected in his eyes. He didn't ask who it was this time. Some truths didn't need confirmation. He simply placed the phone down, closed his eyes, and smiled. Later that night, he went through his drawer and found the old phone, the one he had refused to throw away, still carrying her name in his contacts. For years he couldn't bring himself to delete it. Tonight, he didn't have to. He opened their chat once more, scrolling past thousands of lines, each message like a preserved heartbeat. The laughter, the arguments, the dreams they had half-built and abandoned. And finally, her last message. "If you ever write again, make sure it's real." He whispered into the stillness, "It is." Then, without hesitation, he placed the phone on the windowsill and let the snow settle around it. It wasn't a grave. It was a memorial to everything that had shaped him. He didn't need to delete her name anymore. It had become part of his story's foundation, not its wound. The phone stayed there for days, encased in frost like a relic. Each morning, the sunlight glinted off the screen, scattering reflections across his desk as if the past were winking at him, saying, "I'm still here, but you're free to go." Weeks passed. The world thawed. Spring returned, tentative and slow. One morning, he received a letter from the publisher. It was an invitation. The book had been nominated for a literary award. He laughed when he read it, not from pride, but disbelief. The man who once couldn't send a message without regret had somehow sent one that reached thousands. At the ceremony, the hall shimmered with light, and when his name was called, he walked to the stage with quiet steps. He didn't give a speech about grief or love. He spoke about listening. "Sometimes," he said, "the messages we never send still find their way to where they're meant to go." The audience was silent for a moment before the applause came, warm and endless. He caught sight of faces, strangers moved by words that had once been born of his own pain, and realized something profound. Pain shared becomes language, and language becomes survival. That night, as he left the building, the air smelled of rain. He wandered through the city, past cafes they had once visited, past the bookstore where she'd laughed too loud, past the river where they had walked in the cold. Everything looked the same, but it no longer hurt to look. He reached the bridge at dawn, and for the first time in years, he felt ready to cross it. The sky was pale gold, the air trembling with birdsong. He leaned against the railing, watching the sunlight scatter across the water. In his pocket, the small brass key he had once found in the journal pressed against his fingers. He took it out, turned it over in his palm, and smiled. It no longer mattered what door it opened. It had done its job. It had kept a part of her alive until he was ready to let go. With a soft breath, he dropped it into the river. It disappeared with a quiet splash, a sound almost too small for the weight it carried. As he stood there, watching the ripples fade, he took out his phone and typed a new message, not to her, but to himself. "You made it." He pressed send, though it had no recipient. The wind lifted his hair, carrying the warmth of the morning against his face. For a moment, he imagined her voice, soft and teasing. "Took you long enough." He smiled. "Yeah," he whispered, "but I'm here now." The world moved on around him. Cars, footsteps, laughter, but he stayed for a while, breathing in the quiet. The journals, the letters, the messages, all the fragments of love and loss, had become something else entirely. Not memories, not ghosts, but echoes that had guided him home. When he finally turned to leave, he didn't look back. He didn't need to. Somewhere, in some small and unseen way, the echo of her presence still lingered, not in words or screens, but in the steady rhythm of his heart, where the past had stopped hurting and started to hum with life again. As he walked down the empty street, his breath visible in the pale morning air, he realized that what remained between them was not absence, but transformation. Love doesn't vanish. It just changes the shape it takes in us. The messages he had never deleted were no longer reminders of loss. They were proof that he had once loved deeply enough to be changed forever. Somewhere between silence and memory, between goodbye and gratitude, Alexei found what he had been searching for all along. Not closure, but continuity. When the first sunlight touched his face, it felt like forgiveness itself. And with that, he disappeared into the dawn, carrying nothing but the echo of her voice and the quiet certainty that some stories never really end.